Hello, everyone. As you're joining this event now, we're close to 400 participants already, crossed the 400. We're expecting full house, so around 1,000 attendees. Like 650 in a second. And then we're going to start any moment from now. So, okay, a couple of more people coming in. Okay. Okay, whilst few more people might come in, we will start now. Hello, good evening, everyone. Good evening to this event on solidarity with the women on the streets, feminist foreign policy responses, demands towards in the context of Iran. I'm Christina. I'm one of the co-founders of the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy. We are a Berlin-based research and advocacy organization that brings feminist thinking and analysis into foreign and security policy. Feminist foreign policy, in a nutshell, means trying to upend patriarchal structures around the world by using the diplomatic kind of toolbox, because we know that this is the only way for sustainable stability and peace worldwide. We have the incredible honor to have a most distinguished panel here with incredible panelists. For the first half an hour, we also have the special honor of the minister's time. Thank you so much. So the first half an hour will disproportionately focus on the remarks by the minister as well. It will still be a conversation. As a general reminder, we're trying with this event really to cater for kind of this huge range of knowledge and expertise that people come to this event with. And that is somewhere from wonderful Instagram followers, which is interested but don't have any background, to experts, journalists, diplomats. So it's a huge range. So let us embrace all those moments when some of you might think, oh, that's a bit superficial, or others might think, I don't understand what they're talking about. It will be that mix. To start with, I would like to ask Sanam Anderlini. Sanam, you are the founder of the International Civil Society Action Network, a women-led peace-building organization that operates in more than 40 countries around the world. I would love for you kind of to set the scene and share with us what is happening on the ground in Iran. You and your family, you fled just after the revolution in '79, and you stay in close contact with relatives there. Sanam, over to you.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Minister, for joining us, and for my colleagues here. It's also a real pleasure to be with the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy as a member of your advisory board. I can't think of a better organization to be hosting this kind of a dialogue. So I think for all of us and for any Iranian who is watching from abroad, these weeks have been incredibly emotional and traumatic. I was 11 when I left, and I returned when I was 18 because my father was stuck there. So I've been was going back and forth to Iran over the decades. And in a way, what we're seeing right now is really a multi-generational force that's coming through. It's like the dam has bust open and everybody's coming. And it's, so when I look at it, there's traumatic kind of PTSD in some ways, because it's like, I remember being 18 and being in Iran and being afraid of the morality police in those days, and my friends, and, you know, hearing about raids and how young people were arrested and what would happen to them. And then generations that went forward. And so now I look at it, and they're 20-year-olds and 18-year-olds and 16-year-olds and younger kids. That's the age of my children. So it really is multi-generational, and there is a sense of just triggering memories, I think, that brings out a lot of the emotion of the hopes and the fears and so forth. And at the same time, I think there's a lot of vicarious trauma in the sense that we feel guilty for not being there and not feeling kind of on the front lines when you see these kids. So the emotions run high. The stakes are also incredibly high. This is a very new chapter in the interaction of the government with the public. We've had protests before. There have always been crackdowns, but it's always been they crack down and they give a little bit of space. This time we're seeing something completely different because also the protests are demanding something completely different. It's extraordinary from a feminist standpoint because it's also the first time that we're seeing a unification around a national issue, like a national, sort of the state of a nation, but the identity that is being forged is around gender. So it's not, we have women from all the different provinces, Baluchis and Kurds and across the cities, across economic divisions and so forth. And certain minorities are being very badly targeted, but there is a unity that is coming around that message of women, life and freedom. And then also what's extraordinary is that for the first time, we're seeing the men stand with the women. In the past, my mother's generation, when she was out protesting the mandatory hijab, the men were like, what's the big deal? In my generation, it was like, put it on. It's, don't get yourself into trouble. Now it's, we're out there with you. So there's some really big changes that are going on from the society standpoint and from the young people's standpoint. And then we're seeing the reactions of the state, and they cannot be underestimated in terms of what they're doing, what we know, what we don't know, and how things are being forged on the ground. So it's very, very traumatic times. And as I say, it's like a roller coaster of hope and fear for most of us. And those in the diaspora, there's also other levels of trauma because of the toxic nature of some of the discourse that's happening. I'll leave it at that for now, and really thank the minister also for joining us, because I can't imagine a better time or a more difficult time for having a feminist foreign policy and having you join us for this kind of an event to really demonstrate how important it is and what it means to take that stand. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sanam. And I want to hand over to you, Minister Baerbock. And first, I would like to acknowledge that all the efforts that you and your ministry over the past couple of months have done to develop a feminist foreign policy. You hosted the first conference on a state level on feminist foreign policy. You're currently developing a strategy on feminist foreign policy. And you personally have been extremely outspoken on a feminist foreign policy. Your life would be easier would you not be doing that, but continue with foreign policy as usual. And over the past couple of days and weeks, we've seen lots of criticism with regards to your foreign policy, feminist foreign policy. And I want to acknowledge that criticism, constructive criticism is always important. And that's also why we're here. But a lot of that criticism has come from actors that could not care less about feminism and women's rights. So I want to acknowledge that in all your efforts. And feminist foreign policy tries to embrace women's rights, defend women's rights, and all the rights of all marginalized and oppressed people. How much can that be done, and how possible is that with a regime where the diplomatic ties are not very strong?
Well, thank you for having me here, and thank you for this online conference, I think we can call it, that you bring together so different women and different engaged women, we have to say, from around the world, because I think this is the most important thing at the moment, that it's not only an issue for politicians, definitely not only for politicians, not only an issue for NGOs, not only an issue for journalists, but this concerns everybody, because we can see in Iran what's going to happen if you live in a society, and I'm very thankful to those of you who have underlined also in the last weeks that this is not something new. This has been there for 4 decades, but if you live in a society where the suppression of women is part of the structural regime and is part of the power game. And I think this is also thanks to the work of you, Christina, and others who have pushed for the feminist foreign policy to make visible that this is not a coincidence, but this is the main power tool. We have had so many societies, we had so many regimes where the suppression of women has been part of holding into power. And we have seen lately, and this is the good news, that women did not keep silent anymore. And we saw that, for example, in Belarus, also there, it was 3 women who actually stood up against the Lukashenko regime and then spoke out. This is not only about women's rights, it's obviously about human rights. And we could see that the suppression of women was also being using of the oppression of other people in society, what we see also now in Iran. And therefore, I think, yes, this is one of the main tasks for feminist foreign policy, to speak out. We had today a meeting of more than 40 female foreign ministers from around the world, also together with Shireen Ebadi, the former Nobel Peace holder who received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2003, taking it without a bail. And then she had to flee later on to Great Britain, which makes clear how long already women are resisting. And many of you who take part here, I mean, I cannot, like, I don't know how you actually bear this if you know your cousin, your friend is in jail right now and is being raped there, is being beaten on the streets, and we have to watch it from an outside. And I think this is where also the criticism, and I take that really also personally, to saying, okay, did we act quick enough, which is really helpful to see, okay, where can we do more? But we can also see the borders of foreign politics, because obviously we cannot do a regime change from outside. What we can do is support those brave people on the streets, which is obviously not an individual protest. It's a huge movement. This is why we are trying to support them who are marching on the streets. We are sanctioning those who are responsible for these crimes. And thirdly, and this is very important for me, and this is what we discussed with the other female ministers today, is how we can collect the evidence to hold those accountable for all these crimes which are going on currently. If I may say a last sentence on the feminist foreign policy, I know that many of those who are saying, so where's the feminist foreign policy now? I think it's very important that one is always self-reflective, which I am, to see, okay, what we can do more, but to put now on the shoulders of the feminist foreign policy to solve like 40 years of an autocratic regime, of a regime which suppresses all its citizens and says by a finger snip, this has to be solved now by the feminist foreign policy, is being used or placed just in the hands and in the cards of those who do not want a feminist foreign policy. And I say that very openly here. Maybe some of you are criticizing me for this as well, but we see in Sweden, for example, who invented the feminist foreign policy, that it's not a given, and that some people do not like the feminist foreign policy because obviously we unite here. We also disagree on the different options because we come from different backgrounds. But what makes us so strong and what makes the women in Iran so strong is that they stand together besides any social differences, besides any religion, besides any family background. They stand together between 90 and 9 years old. And we stand together worldwide, as most of the women worldwide, knowing that the women marching in the streets of Tehran and especially in small villages are also marching for our rights as women. And therefore, I think it's so important that we ask ourselves how we can do more for the women in Iran, but underline that without a feminist foreign policy, we wouldn't be speaking about this issue so strongly. So thanks also to your center that you put up this topic years ago when people were actually shouting at you and others, that you even dared to mention that foreign policy has a female dimension.
Thank you, Minister. Allow me one follow-up question before I hand over to others as well to comment. You were one of the first to demand more sanctions. Monday's EU sanctions, are they sufficient to show feminist solidarity with the women and protesters on the street?
Well, they are obviously not sufficient enough. One has to be so frank and open to change the regime. We see this also with Russia. The sanctions cannot stop this brutal war, and obviously the sanction alone cannot stop this regime. But the question is, would it be any better without any sanctions? And I know that many have asked, so why only little sanction? Well, first of all, and I'm trying not to be too long again, we do have already 4 sanction regimes in place, not only because of the nuclear issue, but also because of human rights violations in the past. So for example, the current interior minister, he is already on the sanction list because of offenses he did in the past when he had a different ministry. So he's not allowed to enter the European Union. All the assets are being frozen. I think it's not enough. This is why we are preparing another sanction package targeting also on family members. This is really tricky. And again, I understand why people are saying, why are you not quicker enough? Because we live, thanks God, in a democracy and in a rule-based society. So I cannot just say, so we sanction the wife or the children of a governmental member who's responsible for this, that they cannot study in Europe anymore. I have to give proof why they are benefiting of this regime. I think it helps the women on the streets indirectly because it shows that we have taken a side. This is also so important in most of the wars and the crimes, and this is at least in which way also many Iranian women are addressing me and addressing you and all of us, be our voice and take a side. And by the sanctions, we are making clear, Germany, the European Union, me as a foreign minister, I'm not neutral between the regime and those women on the street. I take a side for the women on the streets because they are marching for women's rights. They are marching for what we all in this conference can do every day, go out, live our life as we want as a human being.
Thank you so much. Of course, everyone will have the chance to also comment on what the minister said. I would now like to direct questions to Natalie Amiri and Gilda Sahebi about the role of the women. Natalie, you and your book, which into English translates as Between the Worlds, you write that if something were to change in Iran for the better, it would be through women. And you, Gilda, you've been very outspoken about how the women in Iran, they're actually showing us what feminism really means, and whether feminism is actually that Western concept as so many think it is, which is not. So Natalie and Gilda, can you kindly comment on the role of women and why they're such a force of strength?
Gilda, you or me? Who is starting?
You want to start?
I start. Taraf shuru shud.
You're already being very Iranian. You go ahead, Natalie.
Look, a lot of people are asking me if this is a feminist revolution, and I would say yes. Iran protests may be the first time in history that women have been both the spark and engine for an attempted counter-revolution. So Daniel Edelstein, a political scientist at Stanford, said the role played by Iranian women right now seems very unprecedented, but I'm not surprised. I saw the women in the street, despite of being discriminated every day by the Gesht Ershad, the morality police, or by every man at the street and by law. So I'm not surprised because the women got stronger and stronger. So now we see schoolgirls, you know, screaming and showing their middle finger towards pictures of the supreme leader. And by the way, getting for this murdered. So, you know, Sarina Ismail Sadeh, she was 16 years. She's 16 years old. She was a video blogger. Recently, she posted before her death, I always think, why did I have to be born in Iran? Because to live in Iran as a woman means that you are all the time discriminated. According to Sharia law, a woman in an Islamic Republic has no right to divorce, only if she's beaten to hospital. And for this, you need a lot of witnesses. So a woman can only work and leave the country with the husband's permission. She's only half of a man worth in front of court. She has no custody. She's not allowed to dance. She's not allowed to sing. And that's the situation of women which have been systematically discriminated in the last 43 years.
Yeah, I can just acknowledge that everything Natalie said is exactly right. That's the situation of women we've had in Iran for decades now. And also concerning politics here in Germany and in Europe, these people in Iran, these women in Iran, they're not victims, they're fighters, they're survivors every day. And we don't need to help them. They don't need our help, but they do need us to not put stones onto their path that they're going right now. And we have seen feminist movement in these regions for a long time. It's nothing new. Dastan can say more to that. We've had that in Kurdistan, where Kurdish women have already shown us that there is feminism. Of course, there's where women are, there's feminism. That's just how it works. And I think it's important to acknowledge the structures that have made the fight and the hardship of these women possible. And I think we need to look at the structures and how we can change those structures and how we can make sure that we do not strengthen the people who are suppressing these women. And I think because the minister talked about the sanctions, I mean, we don't need to go into details about the sanctions, but I do think that there are more ways to tackle this regime. And it is not the task of the German government to make sure that this regime falls. Not at all. This is not our task, and this is not our, it's not even an option that we should have. But we do need, we have to see, we have feminist foreign policy in a still patriarchal structure. It's not like Germany is feminist heaven. We still have, our politics are still determined by a lot of male traits. And when we look at Iran, we have we saw politicians, German politicians traveling there, you know, talking about business and making sure that you know the communication lines are open, and which makes sense. But I do think that, and I applaud Germany and the foreign ministry and the minister for bringing in feminist policy and politics, foreign politics, into our even realm of discussion, because we didn't have that before. And as you said, and as we see in Sweden, can just be taken away in a day. So I think it is a hard work. I think it is work that needs time, but I think especially now what's happening in Iran can be a stepping stone for feminist foreign policy to actually find its way to be a structural path and a foundation of politics. And I think it's a good point to start, to change politics towards Iran to support these women and these people.
Thank you, Natalie and Gilda. I want to hand over to Dastan right away, because that's just perfect what we talked about. But before, I want to acknowledge that, Minister, I'm conscious of your time. In case you will have to leave soon, if you have a few more minutes do you have a few more minutes? Maybe that question first.
5, yeah. So if somebody wants to go before me, that's fine. And then I can say
great.
a few sentences.
Great. Then maybe Dastan, could you briefly, before I come back to you later, but because Gilda also mentioned Gina Amini, she was a Kurdish woman, and you published widely on the intersection of oppression with regards to ethnicity, socioeconomic situation, and gender in Iran. What is the situation for Kurdish people, and especially Kurdish women in Iran?
Thank you so much for this invitation, this panel. Indeed, it's a very intersected form of oppression that we're seeing right now. the Kurdish people have been occupied by Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey for the last 100 years now. And what we see in Iran is that even before the Islamic Republic, they have been economically marginalized, specifically targeted, also culturally attacked. I mean, last year you had a case against someone like Azara Mohammadi, who was put into prison for 5 years for teaching Kurdish language. So it's a lot of discrimination happening. And before joining this panel, I talked to my contacts that I have there, and there are some really, really horrible things happening right now. Right now, we see that there is a deliberate war happening in these areas, like really military maneuvers against Kurdish and Baluchi areas, for example, as well. IRGC forces, so the Iranian forces, are torturing kids. They are actively attacking schools. They're attacking young people because they see that they are the forefront of the revolution. They see that it's young women, minority women, lower class women that are, going against the regime, that are very, very courageous right now. And they're specifically going for girls' school. So this should be very worrying, especially as we know that the majority of the Iranian population is under 35. So they are really dealing in a war against the majority, right? And you have 8 to 10 million Kurdish people as well that are not only standing there alone, but they have solidarity from the other parts of Kurdistan. We have solidarity from the Kurds in Iraq, from the Kurds in Syria, from the Kurds in Turkey, that are all leading a feminist fight for equality. So that's the thing, and that has always been the character of the movement of Iranian Kurds as well. They've always been connected to the overall leftist organizations in Iran. They have always been connected with their struggle. They always analyzed their struggle altogether. So I think it's very important to keep that in mind. But as of now, we really don't know, we cannot grasp the number of people that have been killed. It's a real war that they're leading, and they're leading it transnationally, which we will probably talk about later, but it's really a transnational war that Iran is leading. We're far, far beyond the point of just talking about some internal conflict, but we also have to acknowledge the repression that Iran has been doing. They have been doing it transnationally and well. 1992, it was in a restaurant in Berlin that Kurdish oppositionals, together with Iranian oppositionals, were assassinated, directly killed. And their assassins, to this day, are living. There are still people that are alive. They have not been brought into a court, and there is political reasons for that. So I think a feminist foreign policy also has to cut with the Iran politics of Helmut Kohl, the Iran politics of Gerhard Schröder, the Iran politics of the last 30 years. That's what we should learn out of that.
Thank you, Dastan. And speaking of that, with Sawsan Chebli and Minister, in a second, my last question for you. But with Sawsan Chebli, here on the panel, we have someone who worked closely with former Foreign Minister Steinmeier as deputy spokesperson. And Sawsan, you were in the Foreign Office when the Iran nuclear deal was signed in 2015. And Minister, currently, we're reading a lot about the Iran nuclear deal, about the negotiations, whether they should be paused, whether they can be a diplomatic tool to have some influence or not. What is, from asking this to you, Sawsan, Minister, what is your view on that? How can the deal be used for the better or the worse? So not use it.
Well, thanks for this question, because this is also something which always I'm being addressed with a lot. Well, first of all, there is no deal, at least not in my leadership here. I mean, many of you discussed also what's happened in the past, and I have also many question marks what happened in the past. Also, when we had an understanding, and this is not only related to Iran, but obviously also to Russia and other countries around the world, saying, well, if we do trade, then this helps also human rights. I mean, this was a total, not only misunderstanding, but wrong politics, obviously, that business doesn't help human rights. And this is why I'm always advocating that values and also interest, this is not two sides of the stories, because this has been the story for a long time that we have to decide, but it's in our pure own interest that we defend also the values in other countries, because in the end, it turns also against us, and we can see that in Russia and Belarus. We can see it now in Iran, and hopefully we don't see it in the future in China. So this is why, before I come to the JCPOA, I would really like to make clear because I think this is what we owe also as a German society to the people in Iran, that we are not having any business deals or any deals on the shoulders of those who are now in the streets. So especially all the economic relations, they have been cut already in the last years. They have been cut because of the nuclear enrichment process, but also, I think this is important, they have been cut also because of the more radical is a bit of cynicism here, but within the last 12 months. So also within the last 12 months, we had more sanctions on the regime because of their treatment of the people. And this counts also for the JCPOA. Since I've been in office, actually, my first 3 days in office, I was in Liverpool at the G7 meeting for foreign ministers, and we were discussing the JCPOA. And we were discussing that the regime has something on the table, and what is on the table is, and unfortunately the name is a deal, but this is not a deal. This is what the international community, the United Nations, the Security Council did, I'm lacking the English word, not ask for, but called on Iran to stop the enrichment of the nuclear process, to bring back the EIAO into the nuclear power plant, because by international law, Iran is not allowed to do what they are doing. And I understand that there are argumentations now saying stop this deal, but I can tell you that there are no negotiation where I went in the last 9 months to Iran to discuss, okay, I give you this or I give you that. All we did from the G7 ministers is saying you have to stop the enrichment process. And I think, and this is why I'm asking maybe to consider this kind of argumentation, that a regime with nuclear weapons doesn't help the women on the streets. It is even more dangerous because you can blackmail also with these nuclear weapons. And we have been discussing over the last months, the whole time as a European Union, also with France and UK, to say, okay, we have to prevent everything that Iran gets nuclear bomb. And we don't hand over anything in this regard. We have sanctions in place already under the old system. So also all the economic ties has been cut. The oil and gas, yes, Iran is one of the biggest country for oil and gas, but there are no oil and gas connections with other countries, and also not with Germany. Germany is still doing trade with Iran, but especially with medicine and nutrition, because I think this is something important we learned from the past, that sanctions shouldn't target society. And this is why we are keeping up the possibility for medicine and nutrition. Even though I have to leave quite soon, I would really like to ask you if you have other things where you say, well, look into this. I look now with my office again that we have, like, on the chemical side, I know that there's still some trade going on. What kind of chemical is it? Is it really for helping the people? If it's not, we have to look how we can stop this. We look with regard to the nuclear issue. Anyhow, since the last year, what is happening in the nuclear power plants, even though we are not allowed to go in there, which is the big problem. We are looking what we can do with the further sanctions. We are holding the Human Rights Council. Again, there we have the problem that not every country is with us. I brought it in front of the Human Rights Council to have a special rapporteur to collect the evidence of all the crimes which are going on at the moment, so we can hold those accountable. What we did, for example, with Yazidi women, also in Germany, universal jurisdiction is a tool of a human rights policy to hold in the future also those accountable for these crimes. But I think Natalie Amiri was right saying that we have to see the broader picture of the Sharia regime. And this is also something where I'm really thankful for all of you who said, well, make this visible and make this visible. Obviously, we have Sharia regime also in other countries, but to speak out what a Sharia regime means for the women in Iran, Natalie Amiri mentioned already the divorce issue. If you go to court, you need 2 women to counter 1 man's sentence at a court. If we see the devotion, if we see that people, that women cannot dance, that they cannot dress as they want. What we heard about, I think Düzen Tekal was posting it today, that families are being threatened now. If their girls are in the prisons, they will send them back being pregnant, obviously saying that they rape teenager girls, which is not only a war crime, it's a crime against humanity. And on this space, I'm working on holding those accountable, and especially making clear this is something which concerns all of us. I think Gilda has said it, and she's right. The women on the streets, they don't need our applause, or they don't need our encouragement. They are obviously way braver than many of us politicians. However, I think what we owe them is to not only spread their voices, but also taking away the obstacles, as you have mentioned. And if there are any other things, what we can do, I know also the closing of the embassy, it has been asked from some of you. I think we need a German presence in Iran to see what's going on the ground, but also to help in single cases bring people out of Iran and to hold up the presence. But I'm really happy to learn also as a follow-up to this, what you think would be good to hold not only those accountable, but really be there with the women, but also the men. And now it's half of the society which just wants to live a life like us in democracy and in freedom.
Thank you so much. Sanam, was that a pen raise?
Just a very quick, can you hear me? Just a very quick note on that. I think this is one of the issues that we have, that if you are not present, you have no leverage, right? And the problem with the blanket sanctions, the targeted sanctions is one thing, and I wish we had more of those. But when I looked at the EU sanctions, I was actually surprised that these people still had accounts, because since 2010, any Iranian I know hasn't been able to open an account anywhere in the European Union or in the UK or Canada or US, and most were told to close their account. So there seems to be some discrepancy between how ordinary Iranians are treated and how others might be treated. So we have to be thinking much more. I think it would be great to see some more strategic thinking around these issues. But if the world is not present, then they don't get to see, and there is no leverage. And that's why I think the embassy issue is very important. It's also very important because right now it's one of the few lifelines for Afghans getting out. For that, I am incredibly grateful to you and your government, because you have been the only government that's actually been helping with women, Afghan women and others at risk. But we're seeing this problem across the region, and we need to have a new way of thinking about issues. And it is actually very much a feminist approach to the question, and looking beyond Europe to see where else we can open up the conversations around changes and so forth. But please be conscious of the fact that the sanctions up to now have actually affected the public and the private sector. And this is one of my concerns, that over the years, as the sanctions have hit the private sector in Iran, the state has become one of the biggest employers. And so there might be many, many people whose lives are tied to the state because that's their only livelihood. And so in a way, sanctions could have been helping. We're in a new universe. It's a very different story right now to what it was 5-10 years ago. And it needs a bit more analysis to really understand what the new strategies should be. Thank you.
May I jump on this? And then I really have to leave. I was to say, I think you're totally right. And this is why I was trying together with my French colleague and over the sea with Melanie Joly from Canada. And this is, again, not a coincidence, I think, that it's a female foreign minister, similar age, pushing on this. Because what you have described, I think we could also see in the past that we tried with a new sanction system, and people ask, why is it only a few? Because for every person, we have to write a little report why this person is on the sanction list. But exactly for your argument, just putting the entities, we put in the past many entities, and then you couldn't identify who it actually was. And this is why we turned it now around, named every person. And what I said with the family members, I think it's another step to take. It's more difficult, but to hold really those accountable who did the crimes and who have to be punished whenever this day is, because we have to hold them accountable, obviously, in front of courts around the world.
Thank you so much, Minister. I want to get Sawsan, you and Dastan in. Sawsan, you were the deputy spokesperson 2014 to 2016 under Foreign Minister Steinmeier. And I want to go back to the negotiations around the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA. Because it is actually, it is not black and white, and we heard that before. And from a feminist perspective, disarmament, demilitarizing security structures, nuclear disarmament are key priorities. But now you have most all feminist organizations and actors and people on the street saying, pause any negotiations that are not even happening at the moment, really. But Sawsan, can you tell us why is it still so difficult for so many politicians and policymakers to distance themselves or hold on, because it's pretty divided even in German policymaking area?
Thank you, Christina, for your question. I think to answer this question, we have to go back to June 2015 and see how the region and Iran looked like. The United States were engaged in Iraq and Syria. We had a war in Yemen between Saudi and Iran, or via proxies. Iran was only 2 or 3 months away from producing a bomb, and Israel was more or less openly threatening to attack Iran's nuclear program, and a military escalation was actually a very real scenario. So this was the frame actually and the time we were negotiating the deal. So the aim of the nuclear agreement was to prevent a nuclear arms race in the region and to make another war actually less likely. Never, no one thought that we would eliminate Iran's capabilities to enrich uranium and then to build the bomb forever. That was so clear. And the minister mentioned it. We had the hope that the agreement would bring economic prosperity, and by bringing prosperity to the region, the situation for women and also on human rights in general would improve. By the way, this is a misunderstanding. The deal was never a gift from us to Iran. Iran wanted something and we wanted something. And the pressure against the deal actually came from abroad, came mainly from Israel and Saudi, and also maybe from the Iranian community in the States. But within Iran, I remember the videos and the images of cheering and chanting Iranians when the deal was done. And I had the feeling that it meant something to them. It gave them hope. And I remember myself crying when I saw these images. It was historic, and people ignore that when nowadays we talk about the agreement. But looking at the situation today, we have to admit very clearly that in many of our hopes, we were wrong. Iran actually never stopped playing a destructive role in the region. The situation for women and human rights, we can see it every day, is so bad, and it gotten worse. And Iran has now even enough uranium to build the bomb. I asked myself, and many ask themselves, would Iran actually look differently today if Trump had not withdrawn unilaterally from the deal and had not imposed sanctions on Iran that rather harmed the population than the regime itself? I'm not sure, but I would say it's both. It's Trump, but it's also the regime and its foreign and domestic policy. The US just a couple of days ago announced that talks to revive the nuclear deal are no longer on the agenda, which actually means the deal is dead. And as the minister said, there are no negotiations taking place right now, which is right. So if it's dead, why don't we as Europeans just withdraw from it, right? We can answer that question. You asked that question, it's dead. So let me be honest and tell you, I'm torn on that question. I don't think Germany should take this step unilaterally anyways. I'm terrified by the idea that Iran under this regime could have a bomb in the near future. And I'm not sure, as the minister said, if that's the biggest game changer for the people on the street. I don't think an Iran that has a nuclear bomb would help them. On the other hand, I know, and all of you who are today with us know, that the regime uses the deal so much to show that they are still a player on the international arena. They need it. Even if it's just symbolic, it means a lot to them. But we definitely need, if we don't withdraw from the deal, from the agreement, we definitely, and this has been mentioned, we need concrete more measures that hurt the regime. We don't need sanctions that hurt the population. We had that enough in the last years. And what I think is also very important is to isolate the regime internationally and make clear that it is not and can never be a partner, because they use this international stage so much. And I think we should be even clearer on our solidarity, show face, even if it's just symbolic, and not give the impression that we're giving right now to the people in Iran, I would say, that we are more afraid of instability in the region, that we care about the rights of Iranians for freedom and self-determination. It's so complicated, Christina, as you said, but just to say withdraw and then everything is okay and it will help the people who are fighting for freedom, I think it's just too simple.
Thank you, Sawsan, for this. I want to bring in Enissa. I saw, Dastan, you raised your hand. Was it directly to something the minister said, or shall I come back to you later? What do you prefer?
It was just about the policy recommendations, because it was specifically asked whether there are recommendations. And there are 4 very clear recommendations. The first is to answer to cross-border military attacks, the way that the international law is seeing that. I mean, there has been cross-border attacks all the last years. We're talking about a nuclear bomb, but there has been excessive rocket attacks on Iraq, on Syria, in Yemen. All of this stuff has been happening. So for people that have been dying there in the last years, it's a very cynical question of, is there going to be a bomb or not? They have been already dying the last years. They've always really been killed the last year. So that has to be answered. And we've seen that Iran is doing that. Second of all, when it comes to the asylum processes, there is still so many problems. There's so many Afghan people that are left. There is actually a wall being built between Turkey and Iran by the same company, state company, Turkish company, that is also building the wall to Syria. So that is specific stuff that we can do to help the people that are specifically targeted by the regime to have safe possibility to go abroad and to come to Europe. The third thing is with the ambassadors. We know that consularic work can be done without official representatives. So there can be a symbolic act of pulling ambassadors without completely laying down the consular work. And I know that's a bigger discussion, but this is things that you have to think about when there's literally mass graves being dug for young kids, And the fourth point with the sanctions, what I can absolutely only double, is that there are possibility for targeted sanctions, and we have seen it by Canada. Canada has been much, much more extensive in the last days, and with the situation that we see also with the role that people had like Javad Zarif, that we're going for soft power strategies in legitimizing the killing that has been done by the Iranian regime. These are people that should be targeted as well, not only the military sector.
Minister, is this something you would like to respond to?
I don't want to take all the time to react to all of these points. Well, the first 2 points, I totally agree. I've been therefore in close contact with the Iraqi foreign minister, especially on the situation of breaches of international law from Iranian side, because again, it's no coincidence. Also with regard to the engagement of Kurdish society, and that most of the crimes are being committed also in this regard. So you're totally right. We have to be, and we are outspoken on these issues. I had like also a lot of pressure within my party with regard to the situation in Yemen and the Houthis, because I tried to make clear also in this regard, Iran behind the Houthis in the Yemen war, that we have to speak about these kind of relationship and these kind of issues, and this goes on and on, as you have mentioned, for other countries. Asylum, also there, you're right. We can see it also in other parts. Refugees, the poorest people in the region are always being taken hostage from the regimes. So it's a question with regard to bringing the people out. You mentioned, Christina, you mentioned also the Afghani people and women in the region. This counts also for us, that we are calling for a ban on transferring back Iranian people to Iran, to have like a federal-wide, not only in some of our federal states, but a federal-wide ban on bringing people back to Iran. With regard to the embassy, but I said this already, I have a different perception, because I see what happens in those embassies where we lack people, and unfortunately we lack a lot of visa people in many embassies, also in Iraq. This is with regard to family ties. This is one of the most horrible things I have to deal with here in my office, is that I know that kids are waiting to join their parents again, and we don't have enough staff to fill out the visa. So yes, I do need my diplomats in the embassies. The opposite is rather the situation at the moment, if I can say this, also in this kind of situation, because I have also responsibilities for the people in the embassy. The most easiest thing would be for me now to say we close the German embassy in Tehran, because obviously they are also being threatened by the regime at the moment, especially those who are working for us. They're Iranian people working for us. We have seen this also in other countries, that they are endangered, and they do their work every day to help Iranian people, to help dual citizenship. So this is why I would really like to ask on you also to see this kind of perspective. If I would close the embassy, this would be just benefiting, I believe, the Iranian regime, because they would be happy that we are not there in the ground anymore. The opposite here in Germany, and this is where we are looking closely into it, because I've heard it also from many people who live in Germany with dual passports, that obviously the hands are very long, and we have to protect people living in Germany. We are looking at this very closely, also what's going to happen here in the Iranian embassy. So this is another point for me with regard to the embassy. I have to leave now, and thanks that I could have some speaking time here. I'm really looking forward to discuss with many of you it also in the upcoming weeks. I would like to underline at the end, because it's a feminist foreign policy issue there. I mean, where you can see all of this in a nutshell is, I think that a regime with very old men is actually thinking they can speak for their society of an average age of 32. So this is a question of half of the situation. If half of the population is being oppressed, women, obviously something is totally wrong in the society, but also in societies, and this counts actually also for our societies, if there's an understanding that by age you can speak for the youth, you're obviously totally wrong. And therefore I also agree with all of you who have said this won't go away. So this is also why there's no thinking in our government of saying, okay, we just keep silence because this will be going away. I believe this won't go away, because we can see that this movement is a movement not only of women, it's a movement of young people, and it's a movement of those who believe in freedom, and this has the stronger power. So thank you that I could join this very incredible group of experts and of those of you who report about the situation every day. Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you so much, Minister, and thank you for staying longer than planned. Really appreciate it, and it really shows your interest and solidarity also with the protesters on the street. So really appreciative of that. Thank you. Before I want to go back to Sanam, Dastan, Sawsan, Gilda on traditional foreign policy making and what that has to do with maybe the situation now, I want to bring in you, Enissa, now. Feminist foreign policy and those who champion it really show that ultimately it's about human security and the human stories behind. It is not what traditionally kind of this men sitting together at a table and like strategically talking as if it was like a game of chess. It is about the people ultimately. And you, Enissa, you're really, I would say, one of the most outspoken and vocal and visible people of Iranian origin as well in the German landscape at the moment, who brings it back to the experiences and what it means to the people. You recently gave a very emotional speech in Frankfurt as well. So I want to open the space now for a couple of minutes again to bring it back to the experience of the people, and maybe also your family fled Iran when you were very little. So I would really appreciate if you could bring in your story, the story of your parents and of your friends and family in Iran.
Thank you, Christina. First of all, thank you for creating that room. I think it's so important, and thank you for, I think the people outside, they don't see how much work we're doing, like kind of behind the scenes, like not only in our official panels and in all you great people's work in journalism and you know, scientific work, but also like today, like there's no day passing by, like yesterday you and me, we talked for an hour, or like the foreign minister gave me the honor of inviting me a few times to really listen, you know, also listen to our voice from different perspectives. So what I can say, I mean, I feel like Sanam said it very beautifully in the beginning, like it's a really, like to us with who are of Iranian, you know, like Iranian origin, like who fled Iran and are refugees in Germany, it's very traumatic. So I'm aware of that. I'm aware that I'm very emotional about this topic, and it has like a, you know, I have personal feelings about it. My parents have a backstory about it. Like when the Evin prison was burning, I don't know. I think I was on the phone for about 6 or 7 hours, and with every person I was talking, everybody was crying. Like it was so hard on all of us. To me personally, it felt like, to me it was the feeling like this is my young father who had been imprisoned in Iran. So I felt like this is my dad kind of burning there, my 22-year-old dad. So I get that. But I also told the foreign minister, who I respect very much for her efforts, I told her that I can only, you know, also give a perception maybe of what people in the public, because of my followership, I can see all the messages getting in, and I feel like there is a tone in all of those messages all of those messages I'm getting, that we prioritize different crises in the world, different situations in a different way. At least we can say, you know, we handle it a different way. And this is something which I felt very, you know, very strongly about Iran right now, that also by reading like big articles and stuff, that the freeing of the Iranian people, all the people in Iran, and especially the minorities and the ones who are like, you know, are under the most kind of pressure and oppression. This is like a non-negotiable situation to us. Like all this, like it should be, we should be very unyielding towards the situation in Iran. And I felt, and I could, you know, I could sign that off too, that people handling different situations of the world with a different approach to it. And this is something like, to me personally, how my morals are set is like, I cannot, like, there is no room for any discussion about how to help those people, how to free those people, and how to stop the situation right now. Like, there's something like, there was like a discussion going on the last few days that some of our major, newspapers and media sources and medias in Germany are still, reporting what Iranian press reports, like Iranian media is reporting, which is like, basically is like so wrong. They wouldn't do that with Russia. They would never say, so Russia, or they would at least put like a disclaimer and say, Russian media said this, which we know, is not trustable in that form. So about Iran, I felt like, for the first time, I could like experience that firsthand, that I felt like it's just like, it's kind of misleading. There's no need at this point to multiply Iranian media voices. There's no need, like, we know what is happening. We're worried every day. Every day there's a new name, there's a new situation, there's a new person who's like in danger, and these are only the names we know, the names who are up front, like this, the sports person, the woman, the climber woman, like every day there's another person. We are afraid, but we don't even know about all these private persons, all the anonymous people who are dying every day right now. So I have like different thoughts about it, and I try to, try to see it not emotionally, even though I just can't. I'm traumatized by it. I can't. But what I feel is like, I know we have to be, which is very hard, which we also can see in this panel right now, we have to be, as I said, we have to be unyielding. We have to be like, it has to be non-negotiable to like keep this position going in every way possible, without, which is hard. That's why I get the position of the foreign minister, without targeting the Iranian society, like the people in Iran, so I get that it is hard, but I just need to get that soft touch out of it, which is like, well, we're sitting here in Europe, and we're discussing it on an intellectual level, but we have to be sometimes a bit more very straight about things, so I mean, I'm on the phone the whole day. I talk to people in Iran. I'm very much scared of very close family I have in Iran, and like people who know me, they know it's like very close. It's not it's like close. And I'm really, as Dastan said before, I vividly remember the assassination in the Mykonos restaurant in Berlin, where people were killed, and still, and this is the situation people in Iran have now all day, every day. And we're talking about, children, we're talking about young people in their adolescence who are really in danger and at danger right now. So I just hope that the attention span of the world, which is it mostly today, is not, treating this topic as a, very, but as another moment, and then forgets about it, because there are a lot of life at risk. And the same goes to Afghanistan. The same goes to Kurdish people, who definitely, have the right to say, we're not heard, we're not heard, we're dying, and we're fighting for it, but we're still not heard. And so I felt like, for instance, I mean, we have the situation, like everything with Russia and the Ukraine. To me, as a European woman who lives here in Europe, who grew up here in Europe, I totally could feel that there was a different approach to it. I mean, we saw so many media outlets talking about, these are people like us, these are people with our religion, these are people who look like us, which is basically just like blatant racism, to say, this is a person who looks like me, so I feel, more involved into the situation. So this is what I'm scared about. And I'm also scared about the Iranian society, because I can see, I think Natalie could, and Gilda and Sanam also, they can confirm, we already have huge a huge lack of being, very united even in this topic. Like I follow up Iranian discussions, I follow them up in Farsi language, and I see these huge fights going on already for what group are you part of, what wave am I part of. And I also, like you said, I had the speech in Frankfurt at the Römerberg, and there was a fight going on. Like there was a real fight, like a physical fight, and the police had to go because some people were raising this flag and other people were raising that flag. So of course, I'm very concerned about the situation. But again, I'm back to the first sentence, and this is basically my point today, and what I wish from you guys also is to be very, that the freeing of the people in Iran from this regime is a very non-negotiable situation, so there should be no compromising about it. There should be no back and forth about it. And I hope there should be not like a short attention span and then leaving these people, behind again. So this is what I hope, that we have these, unyielding unity up front and saying we're not, stepping back on this. So yeah. It's very traumatic, and I just, looking forward to it every day to hear some good news.
Thank you for sharing those
for
very
a change.
Personal impressions and impressions about the situation that is happening now. And I want to go to my next question, that is to all of us. So please, everyone who would like to respond, please do so. We need to talk about in kind of keeping in mind that some situations should not be repeated anywhere in this world. So we need to think what went wrong in Gilda. In a recent article, you were criticizing German policymaking, the SPD in the past, kind of the focus on economic relations and how that undermined priorities for human rights. And so my question to all of you, Sanam, we spoke about it briefly before a little bit as well, would be, is what's happening in Iran right now kind of a result of foreign policy making, patriarchal foreign policy making with a focus of state security and economic ties, and a lack of focus on human rights? And can a feminist approach, I'm so sorry for this, can a feminist approach, a new progressive approach to foreign policy making with a focus on human rights, avoid such huge oppression that then results in uprising, revolution in the future?
If I may, I think the focus on human rights is the most strategic thing we can do. I think we see this over and over again. In the long run, we always hurt ourselves and everyone else by focusing on security, because it's not in the end. We saw that in many places in the world. And I do think, like, if you look at Russia, this is a really good example. On the 24th of February, the whole way we looked at Russia changed completely. And since then, by the way, we've been calling Russia a regime because we're looking at it differently. And I think when we look at the relationship with Germany and Europe with Iran, that's exactly what we need. We need a complete change of policy towards that country. And I can see that, especially in the Social Democratic Party and in the Green Party, these discussions are happening because there are people saying what we have been doing has been wrong, has been propping up this regime. And I think, as we did with Russia, we need a complete change of politics towards Iran. And we need to, Enissa mentioned that, we need to make sure that we understand what is propaganda. We don't know that about Iran yet. We read propaganda all over the place. We just had this article in the Taz yesterday, where a writer, she basically just repeated all the regime language, all the regime talking points in one article. And propaganda is still propaganda, even if it's fancy, if it sounds fancy. So we need to make sure that everyone knows Iranian propaganda is just as we do with Russia. And it's really important we have this discussion right now, because without all this discussion that we are having, that I know that in the parties are happening, I'm talking to politicians and I'm hearing these things that they are reconsidering, and it's not going to happen in one day, as with kind of did with Russia, but it is changing. And I think by keeping the focus on what's happening in Iran, by talking about it, I have heard reports that rape is used systematically, actually, by the regime. We have to remember the whole, the Basiji, all these, the morality police, they are usually from the lower classes, and they are trained by the regime to be animals, basically. They are trained to do that. There is no morale. They don't know anything else. And what is happening with especially girls and women when they are arrested is horrifying. And by focusing on that, we will have a strategic policy towards Iran. We need to understand that. The minister said that the worst thing that is imaginable is Iran with a nuclear weapon. It is. That's the worst thing that could ever happen. It would be the worst thing for Israel, for the world, and especially for the people in Iran. But the only hope for in Iran, which is a huge, very strategically important country in that region, to be without nuclear weapons, are the people. It is never, and it will never be the regime. It is only going to be the people. And what is going to happen if the revolution happens and the regime falls? I don't know. I have no idea. Iranians are just as diverse as every other country. They're going to have fights. Iranians are very good at fighting with each other, super good at it. And so it is, whatever happens, it's going to be a long path, but it is not up to us to dictate what they're supposed to do. We just have to make sure that we show what's happening, that we show that feminism is actually not only a trait of foreign policy, but the trait. It is extremely important because it is strategic, it is smart, and it's the only way to go forwards.
Sawsan, no, you.
Well, just maybe just a few sentences on stability and human rights. As far as I can remember, when talking about the Middle East or German politics or EU politics towards the Middle East, I always remember there was the stability or human rights. And there was always, when you talk to the people in the Middle East, and it does not only refer to Iran, when you talk to Egyptians, when you talk to Palestinians, when you talk to all the people in the region, they tell you, stop talking to us about human rights because it's double standard what you do. You're only interested in stability. What you care about is to support these regimes, whatever it takes, whatever they do, because the only thing you care about is stability. And we haven't changed that. I studied political science, international relations years ago, and that was one of my theses, and it hasn't changed. It's still that way. We haven't changed our policy. I mean, feminist foreign policy is now on our agenda, and I feel that for the first time that we have someone sitting there who has at least this mindset that we have to change something. And as Gilda said, when you talk to politicians, for the first time, I feel that there is a real wish and also strength to change it, but it will take years. It's not going to change tomorrow. This is something we have to consider. Politics that have been driven for decades won't change overnight. That's the only thing that.
Thank you, Sawsan. Sanam?
So I'm going to, for a second, try to take off my hat from a very personal, emotional side of being an Iranian and actually share it from the standpoint of working for 25 years in dealing with women in other war zones and watching countries spill or fall into war. And so give us a bit of a reality check, right? So what we're dealing with, I think, is on the one hand, this fear of things getting much worse in Iran internally, right? The crackdown, and it's possible. We've seen it in other countries. You look at Egypt, look at China. I mean, this is possible because it's the question of how much violence a state is willing to use, right? So you have that concern. We have to be realistic about the other side of the concern, which is that there are other forces that would like Iran to become a failed state, right? There are regional, for the Saudis, for the Israelis, for others, success in Iran is a failed state, or at least a state like Iraq or Libya or Syria, where it's on their knees and doesn't necessarily challenge what Israel is doing with the Palestinians and so forth. So you have that dynamic as well. For those, when the JCPOA question was on, and Sawsan, thank you for saying the threat of war. Anybody who cares about human rights of Iranians wouldn't want a war to be launched against the country because of the nuclear sites, right? So it's a really, really, really tough space to be navigating, to say the direction we want is to go towards the freedoms, the democracy, the openness, and so forth. And part of we have very few countries who've managed to do this well, number one. And it's a process. It goes on, and it really is not an overnight thing. It's a fight that, it's a struggle that goes on. But it's also a struggle that involves a degree of the need for justice and the need for forgiveness. And that's a really hard thing to be saying right now at this moment. But if you look at South Africa, when it came down to it, it wasn't that they were going to prosecute every single, foot soldier and every single security officer. It became about a particular set that would get prosecuted, and others that they came through a transitional justice and reconciliation and so forth process. These are deeply, deeply traumatic, deeply emotional issues, and this is part of the reason why people, when I say I work with women peace builders, and people say, oh, well, peace is, women and peace. I say, no, peace is really difficult. Non-violent, trying to deal with where you've had violence, where you've had levels of rape and killing and so forth over years that we see in other countries. When you say, look, we need to move forward and look to the future that we want, it's not easy. But in a way, this is part of the discussion, I think, that a feminist foreign policy needs to be thinking about, is that what is the future you want? What is the future you don't want? And then where do we need to be at the present? And what happens too often is that the starting point for any of these discussions is the past. And we see it in the context of, it's old groups coming in trying to vie for a position right now. There are lots of diaspora groups that are saying this is their moment. No, what it should be is about the future and about the folks on the ground. And it needs a much deeper kind of analysis, I think, and a discussion around what are feminist values, approaches, systems that we engage in. And some of it may be around the question of targeted sanctions and continued engagement, right? So not closing the embassies, but actually being present, being helpful to people that need to leave, at the same time as continuing your humanitarian assistance on the ground in some ways. So it's the technical side, it's the politics, but there is a sort of a reality check that we also have to have around how dangerous and how easy it is for these things from the outside, for people to say, and for people to be encouraging these kinds of protests. And then who is it that gets violated? Who is it that ends up in jail? And then the attention goes away. 10 years ago, it was Syria that everybody cared about. Nobody is paying attention to Syria right now. Afghanistan, what we spent years saying, Afghan women should be at the peace table because they knew exactly what was going to happen to them. They knew exactly what the Taliban was. Nobody paid attention. Just yesterday in Sudan, a young woman has been sentenced to stoning. This is 2022. How is that possible? And it's not getting any attention, right? Myanmar, who's paying attention there? Because we don't have leverage. We don't have, so the tools and the ways that we've done business has not worked. That much we know for sure. The question is, what is it that you take from what did work? What are the good pieces? And reconstituting that and rethinking in terms of the 21st century, where societies are globalized and connected, and we're watching everything as they go on. But it needs a new way of doing foreign policy, and largely foreign policy is also domestic policy. Foreign policy and human rights and human security are blended in together. So we're not going to solve it right now, but I think it's the beginnings, and it's a really important moment to be genuinely thinking, yeah, how does Europe engage? How does Germany engage? Who are the other states that need to be engaged, and so forth? And where within the Iranian system are there potential openings, if any? You know, are there people not willing to continue batting, you know, hitting people? Are there parts of the system that have tried to stop? What are the pressure points? There's a lot that's inside that we simply don't know. But at the moment, we need to, as somebody said earlier on, we need to be the voice of those that are there, and to, you know, to emotionally remain connected. Otherwise, it just becomes another headline that disappears tomorrow.
And I mean, with so many excellent panelists, 1.5 hours cannot be enough, but we are reaching an end in a couple of minutes. So I have a follow-up question for you, Sanam. And whilst I'm asking this question, I'm asking the rest of you to please think of your minute that each of you will have in the end to say the things you believe it is important to say on such panel with regards to demands, hope, future, lessons learned. I leave it up to you. Sanam, what you just said towards the end did sound hopeful, and I know that from your work with women peace builders on the ground for that you've been doing for decades, you are with your work exactly where the violence, the conflicts are happening. What are the lessons learned from those women you're working with? What are their expectations for a foreign policy that works for all people?
There are many lessons, but a couple of things. Number one, the world is really good at starting wars and not very good at ending them. This is one of the biggest issues that we are faced with. Number two, the women on the ground who end up running to the problems, to solving it, to trying to find the bridges of humanity, to being just the simple act of nonviolence is so profoundly important. There's little images that you know come across on social media of young women standing on the street corner and hugging people. These types of actions in many ways are truly radical, right? And or somebody just sitting and you know, security forces roaming around them. I mean, so there is an element of saying how do we learn from the countries where women have made sure that they have not been implicated in the violence themselves. There are lessons to be learned around those who've taken the risk of talking to the other side and trying to be a bridge, trying to seek out the humanity in the others. That is incredibly dangerous work. They get threatened on all sorts. We have had colleagues whose children have been killed because they have tried to bring about some level of social cohesion and equality and so forth in various countries. There are lots of things we can learn, and then there are lots of things that I can say in the context of Iran right now, it doesn't apply, right? Or we need to really look and see where are the parallels. Should they be talking to colleagues in Myanmar, for example? Because that's another place where you have very heavy presence of the state. The issue of a closed political state is a very different one to where the conflict is broken up. But as I said, one big lesson for me is that in the 25 years I've been doing this work, I don't see any one of the wars that I knew from 25 years ago actually ending properly and moving towards, you know, a sustained peace. It's a very, Sierra Leone, Liberia, all these places, these are very, very fragile pieces, if you want. And Syria, Yemen, Libya, everybody's very good at breaking things down. They're not very good at actually building and recognizing what it means to live together, you know, interdependence. And I would say this to all of us, to, you know, any country, you have to learn to live with the diversity of opinions. The starting point can't be, I'm going to kill you. It has to be, I'm willing to, you know, agree to disagree, right? But this is becoming a real problem, even in the United States and elsewhere, that everybody's becoming so atomized, and social media fuels the hate and fuels the violence. And we, I think from a feminist standpoint, we have to stop and say, how do we do it differently? And this is the time to do it.
Thank you, Sanam. Dastan, your personal concluding remarks, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. From the Kurdish perspective, I would just like to, you know, put a final remarks on it, also getting to some of the points. I don't think this is about starting a war. Like, not every regime change is like an Iraq war type of scenario. The regime started killing people. The regime is the follow-up regime to one of the biggest empires in history. The Iranian monarchy was based on thousands of years of imperial history. Iranian secret service is one of the most consecutive secret services in the world. They are prouding themselves by that. So I have to say, from a Kurdish perspective, we have to ask the question, what is Iran in itself? What does Iran mean? Because if you don't want to repeat the mistakes made in 1979, when everyone was like, oh, Kurdish people should be silent, minorities should be silent, we will take care of everything after the revolution. Well, what happened? Women and minorities were the first who were attacked. So we have to be honest about this conversation. We have to be honest about the role of Iran. And in Iranian country, even under the Islamic Republic, it was not this kind of like underdog country that is with its back to the wall. During Iraq, Iran war, 1/6 of global weapons production was going to both sides of the war. Let's not forget that the West has been supplying the Islamic Republic even during that war. One of the weapons used during the Mykonos assassination was of Spanish production. It was sent to the Iranian regime by Spain. So we have to have an honest discussion about that, about the consequences of the Iranian state, this highly militarized state, highly also racist state. When Kurdish people are attacked during Iran protests for wearing their flag, for Baluchi people being attacked for that, then that's because of racism. And racism is not going to change if it's Islamic or secular racism. It's not going to change if it has the face of Reza Pahlavi, where I'm really surprised why this has become a democratic symbol. This has been the people who built up Evin prison, right? So I think overall, we need to have, if we take that seriously, we need to have a really honest discussion about not only what Iran and Islamic Republic means, but also what are successful examples for war against Islamism. A successful example is what we have seen in Syria. It was the Kurdish women that were taking up the arms, and they are taking up the arms together with other Arab women, with other minority women, with Assyrian women, taking their arms up and fighting against Islamism, against the Islamic State. And they are currently let down by the international community. They are let down while they are being attacked by NATO partner Turkey. So I think with double standards and fight against Islamism, there is a lot of other places in the region that we can look at. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Dastan. Gilda, do you want to add your concluding remarks to Dastan's?
I don't have a lot to say. Just I was talking to an Iranian friend in Iran on Tuesday. He's a student. He's been participating in the protests since the beginning. And I was also talking to a non-binary Kurdish person, also in Iran, also fighting since the beginning. And both of them said they didn't talk about fear once. They just said that they're fighting and why they're fighting. And when they mentioned the word fear, they did it once, and they said their biggest fear is that the world is not watching. And so I really think that's what we need to focus on, to not let the world look away, turn a blind eye. I think it's very, very important to keep having these discussions. And I think it's a real chance to change the focus of foreign policy in Europe and in Germany, because we've tried the male stuff for centuries. It's brought wars over and over again. It's brought rape as a weapon. We see that in Iran right now. And I think it's time to change that. And I think now is the time to really get to it. And we watch the people in Iran doing that right now.
Thank you, Gilda. Sawsan, can I ask you for your final remarks?
Yes. Gilda mentioned like watching. My observation also, I have a rather sad observation, but maybe it ends up being positive. I'm getting a lot of messages telling me, why are you so loud on Iran as a Palestinian, but why don't you say anything about Palestine? They send me pictures of Israeli soldiers, how they treat women. And maybe they're right that we should be louder on Palestinians' rights for self-determination. Maybe it's right that we all should be louder on all people that are oppressed. I mean, Sanam mentioned a couple of countries. Maybe we are all too silent on all these horrible things, but whom does it help if I'm silent on Iran? I mean, it doesn't help the Palestinians, right? So my feeling is the only way of feminist foreign policy actually to succeed is if we manage to show solidarity globally, across borders, across walls. That's why I have huge respect for Afghan women who stood up and showed solidarity for their Iranian brothers and sisters. You know, they've been deprived of the basic right of education, and then they stand up showing solidarity for Iranian women. And this is something that we need, because it sends out a gigantic message to everyone. It shows that we don't give up. Whatever you do, we don't give up. So people in the region, I guess, are very closely watching what's going on in Iraq. I'm not saying also the states and the regimes, but also the people. If Iranians succeed, I'm sure in other countries it will happen the same. I think they would feel encouraged to go on streets and fight for their freedom. So cross-border solidarity is so crucial, it's so important. And I feel like the first feminist revolution in Iran could have a spillover effect on other countries, on the rest of the world. And that would be actually my hope, that people in Iran succeed and that other people in the world who are oppressed would stand up too.
Thank you, Sawsan. Enissa, your final minute, if you may.
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for being so courageous and you know, for putting it out there. And I'm bowing down, obviously I'm bowing down to the people of Iran for them to like actually teaching us what bravery means and what bravery is. And we cannot live up to, you know, what they're teaching us right now. We can just sit and learn and watch and try to send them hope and strength. And I want to thank you all, because that was a little bit of my concern, that you know that the perspective is very globally and, you know, very humanistic. Like, I love that Myanmar was being mentioned here. It's very important that Syria, Yemen, that the Uyghurs, I don't know if we talked about the Uyghurs in China, that without, you know, mixing this all up, but acknowledging that we're turning a blind eye to a lot of minorities in this world, because they just don't have the voices to speak for them, or if they speak for them, it's just like a short kind of trend topic, you know, short attention spam-ish situation. So I hope that with all these crises right now, we just learn that we have to keep it up, you know, not just, you know, learn about it, post about it, and then keep going to the next topic, but to learn that we have to do more, all of us collectively, you know, listen to each other and learn more about it. And I also hope that we don't, you know, like start fighting. This is a huge talk I had with Christina. Christina, thank you so much for this room, that you created this room. Like, personally, it means so much to me that we are able, you know, to listen to all these voices and multiply these voices, you know, and hopefully to use, you know, this is what I said yesterday in an interview, that we do have this super powerful tool of social media. We have this super powerful tool of being informed, of seeing everything which is going on. We just haven't learned to how to, you know, create it into the positive possibility and opportunity that it is to really, you know, change things, and don't only use it in a very, you know, informative kind of way, and then, you know, turn to the next thing and getting so exhausted by it. I know it's exhausting. I know it's very traumatizing, exhausting, and infuriating. You know, you're the only time you're angry all the time. You know, you see all this stuff happening and you get angry and more angry, and doesn't leave much coping mechanisms for yourself, you know, to calm down. But thank you so much. I think these rooms are very important. We're learning and we're seeing all this and we're acknowledging it and we're learning from it, and hopefully we'll find a good and fast solution to the situation. I'm very, you know, optimistic that there is a way. It's not all about, you know, it doesn't have to end in war, you know, as it was said before. It can be, you know, societies grow as people do. Also, societies grow and we as a world grow. I hope we'll find a very fast solution to this horrible situation which we have right now, you know. So thank you. Thank you. Thank all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sanam, was this final words? Did you raise your hands? Shall I give you another 10 seconds? Did you?
Sorry, no, I was just gonna say, I was just, but I just want to end by saying, you know, to the girls and young women and young men of Iran, I think all of us are watching and our hearts are with them every day, every minute.
Yes.
Thank you, experts. Thank you, everyone who listened in. We hugely appreciate all your work. We're closely following each of your work and your expertise. So thank you for doing your work. And I wish you a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.